Welcome to the deep dive. If you've ever looked around and wondered why some really big problems just seem to stick around, even when we have data, we have smart ideas. Well, today we're getting right into that. We're looking at this kind of paradox. How do people who are really unhappy with the way things are, who know things need to change, actually get moving? How do they go from just putting up with it to collective action?
Right. It's a huge question. And we're diving into Marshall Gantz's work today, specifically on public narrative, collective action, and power. It's basically a blueprint for how movements get built. And our goal really is to understand why sometimes these, technically great tools like participatory budgeting or citizen report cards, why they're important pieces, sure, but they often just aren't enough on their own to really spark things.
Exactly. That's the puzzle. Why aren't the tools enough?
Because, and this is Gantz's core point, movements don't just erupt. They need leadership, skilled leadership that sees an opportunity and shapes it into like a focused, organized effort. And that's tough work, especially when, people are scared. The outcome isn't guaranteed. There might be opposition.
Okay, so what does that skilled leadership actually involve? Gantz breaks it down, doesn't he? Something about hands, head, and heart.
He does. It sounds a bit simple maybe, but it's powerful. Leadership has to engage people on these three levels.
All right, let's unpack that. The three dimensions. What's first?
Okay, first, the hands. This is really the practical stuff, the logistics, the challenge of actually doing things, learning new skills, figuring out the nuts and bolts, adapting as you go. It's the operational side.
Got it. The how-to of the action itself. Then the head.
The head is strategy. That's the analytical thinking. How to use our resources. What are the costs, the benefits? Where are the opportunities? It answers the how and the what of the action, the blueprint, basically.
Okay, so hands are the doing, head is the planning, which leaves the heart. This feels like the crucial one.
It really is. The heart is all about motivation. Why should anyone bother? It's about creating that urgent need to act, fostering hope that you can actually succeed, and finding the courage to, take the risk.
Because without that,
Yeah,
you could have the best plan and all the skills, but people just won't step up.
precisely. You get a really smart, well-organized group that's too cynical or maybe too afraid to actually make a move. And that's where public narrative comes in. It's the leadership practice specifically designed to engage the heart, to translate values into actual participation.
Okay, so let's stick with that head versus heart distinction for a minute. Because the source material makes a really interesting point about two different ways we seem to know things.
Yeah, this is key. On one hand, you have the analytic way, logic, reason. Ganz calls it cognitive mapping. We use logos, right? We look for patterns, we analyze data, we make hypotheses. It's essential for strategy.
But it stays kind of intellectual.
Right, it doesn't necessarily move you. Contrast that with the narrative way, which Ganz calls affective mapping.
Effective. So feelings, like how we emotionally tag things.
Exactly. It's how we process experiences and symbols and code them emotionally. Is this safe or dangerous? Good or bad? Hopeful? Depressing? It's not about the spreadsheet. It's about the felt experience.
So the head, the analysis, tells us how we could act, the strategy. But the heart, the narrative, tells us why we must act. Why should I give up my Saturday or risk getting arrested or donate money I need?
That's it. The why. You might know intellectually that, say, climate change is bad. That's cognitive mapping. But to actually change your lifestyle significantly or join a protest, you need to feel the urgency, the moral connection. It's like that old idea from St. Augustine.
Yeah.
You have to move beyond just knowing the good as an idea, something you ought to do, to actually loving the good, feeling it as a force that pulls you forward.
Okay, so if narrative is the way we connect with that why, then emotion must be the fuel.
Absolutely. Emotions are how we experience value. The source points out that emotion and motor share the same root there about movement. Emotions give us critical information about how things are versus how they ought to be, and they provide the energy to bridge that gap.
And this isn't just philosophical fluff, right? There's science here, too. You mentioned Martha Nussbaum. Is it really true that logic alone is kind of useless for making actual choices?
Well, for moral choices, yes, that's Nussbaum's point. She argues they're basically futile without the information emotions provide, and the neuroscience backs this up. There's fascinating data on people with damage to the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center.
What happens to them?
They can sit there and rationally list pros and cons for a decision, option A, option B, option C. They can generate all the possibilities, but they literally cannot decide. They can't make the choice.
Wow. Because the value judgment, the thing that helps you weigh the options, requires the emotional input.
Exactly. The head generates options, but the heart assigns value and motivates the choice. Without emotion, you get stuck in analysis paralysis. You can see the map, but you can't decide which road to take.
Which brings us to, how does the brain actually make that call? To act or not act? There are these two systems, right?
Yes, George Marcus talks about two key neurophysiologic systems. Think of them as the brain's alert system and its response system.
Okay, first one, the alarm.
That's the surveillance system. It's like your internal smoke detector. It's constantly scanning the environment, comparing what it expects to see with what's actually happening. When it detects something unusual, an anomaly like an injustice, or maybe, the classic bear in the doorway example, it triggers anxiety.
Anxiety isn't necessarily bad then, it's a signal.
It's a crucial cognitive cue. It says, pay attention, something's off. If the system isn't working, or if we ignore it, we just stay on autopilot, that's inertia.
Okay, so the alarm bell rings. Anxiety. What happens next? How do we react?
That depends on the second system, the dispositional system. This is like your internal mood setting. It determines how you respond to that anxiety signal. And it basically operates on a spectrum between despair and hope.
Despair and hope. So if the anxiety signal meets despair,
Then the system says, danger, retreat. You get fear, withdrawal, maybe panic. Action is inhibited, you freeze.
but if that same anxiety signal, that same awareness that something's wrong, is met with hope.
Then the response shifts completely. Hope triggers curiosity, exploration, enthusiasm. It motivates you to learn more, to find solutions, to engage creatively with the problem. Action becomes possible.
So it all hinges on how we emotionally frame the situation, whether we meet the challenge with hope or despair.
That's the core finding. Our ability to move from just being unhappy to actually doing something constructive really boils down to our emotional interpretation of the moment, fueled by hope.
Which puts leadership right in the center of managing emotions. It's not just about strategy anymore.
Not at all. A key role of leadership is to engage in this emotional dialogue. It's about actively mobilizing the feelings that enable action like hope, anger, solidarity, to overcome the feelings that block it. Fear, apathy, isolation. It's about helping people find their way back to choices they might have abandoned out of despair.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? The source gives these pairings, right? Inhibiting feelings and the motivating feelings leaders need to evoke.
Exactly. There are 5 key pairs we can look at. It's like a conversational battle between the feeling that makes you stuck and the one that gets you moving.
Let's take the first one. The default state for many, inertia. Just staying put because it's familiar. How do you counter that?
With urgency. And urgency here isn't just about speed, it's about priority. It's about making the choice feel necessary now.
So not just, we should do this someday.
Right. Compare a vague 100-year plan for change that inspires zero immediate action with a campaign saying, look, we need exactly 220 volunteers this week to call 3,000 voters. If you want to have a shot, can you step up? That creates focus, shared purpose, and makes the present moment count. It turns time into an arrow pointing forward.
Okay, inertia countered by urgency. What about apathy? People just not caring or feeling like it doesn't affect them?
That's countered by anger. But, and this is important, it's not just any anger, it's specific. It's indignation, outrage, what Ganz calls the injustice frame.
Meaning?
It means the anger comes from a clear gap between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be, based on shared values. People don't mobilize just because things are unequal. They mobilize when they feel that inequality is unjust, that it violates a moral code they believe in. That sense of injustice provides direction and moral power.
Makes sense. Anger at injustice. Then there's the big one you mentioned, fear. How do you counter the fear of risk, of failure, of consequences?
With hope. Fear is natural when you face uncertainty. Courage isn't not feeling fear, it's choosing to act despite the fear. And hope is what makes that choice possible.
Where does that hope come from? It can't just be wishful thinking.
No, it has to be grounded. It comes partly from seeing real, tangible evidence that change is possible, even small wins, what the source calls a credible solution. It also comes from shared faith traditions, stories of past success, and crucially, from relationships seeing others act. Maimonides had a great definition. Hope is the belief in the plausibility of the possible. Not guaranteed, but plausible.
Plausibility of the possible. I like that. Okay, next barrier. Feeling like you're all alone in this. Isolation.
Countered by solidarity, or sometimes called belovedness. This is why collective rituals are so important. Mass meetings, singing together, even shared symbols or ways of dress. They build that powerful sense of we. Knowing you're not alone drastically reduces the feeling of risk and uncertainty.
Right, strength in numbers, quite literally. And the last one, self-doubt, that feeling of who am I, what can I possibly do?
That's countered by YCM Man. You can make a difference. Leaders have to frame tasks and roles in ways that people feel they can actually accomplish. Setting achievable goals is key.
And it's not just about setting the goals, it's about acknowledging the effort.
Right. Absolutely critical. Recognition has to be real and tied to personal accountability. The source gives this perfect negative example. A volunteer spends hours knocking on doors, collects vital information, brings it back, and the organizer just says, "Oh, thanks, just toss it on the pile."
Ouch. Yeah, that would kill motivation instantly.
Totally. Because their specific effort, their choice to act, wasn't seen or valued. It confirms their self-doubt. See, my contribution didn't really matter. You have to close that loop. Debriefing, specific feedback, acknowledging their part in the larger effort that builds efficacy.
Okay, so we have these emotional dynamics, urgency, anger, hope, solidarity, YCM ad, that leaders need to cultivate. How do they weave it all together strategically? This brings us to the public narrative framework itself.
Yes. This is Gans's model for how leaders do this work. It's a cycle, really, connecting three distinct but related stories. The story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. When these work together, they generate purpose, community, and urgency.
Let's break those down. Story of self first. This sounds personal.
It is. It's how a leader communicates their own values, why they're called to lead this effort. But it's not just listing values. It's done by sharing specific choice points from their life.
Choice points.
Yeah, moments where you faced a real challenge, had to make a difficult choice, experienced the outcome, and learned something important and moral. By sharing these vulnerable moments, you connect with listeners emotionally and establish your credibility, your ethos. You have to tell your own story, or believe me, someone else will tell it for you.
We see this in powerful speeches, don't we? Like Obama's 2004 convention speech is a classic example.
Exactly. He didn't just talk policy, he shared choice points. His grandfather choosing to send his son to America, his parents making the improbable choice to marry, the choice embedded in naming him Barack, meaning blessing. These specific moments make abstract values like hope and courage feel real and relatable.
So that builds the leader's connection. Then comes the story of us. How does that work?
The story of us takes those individual experiences and values and connects them to the shared experiences and values of the community or group you're addressing. It weaves individual stories into a collective identity.
Like tapping into existing community narratives.
Precisely. Stories about a nation's founding, a religious community's history, a movement's origins. These are all repositories of shared values and meaning. They define who we are, often in contrast to others, and that shared identity provides a sense of safety and common ground, especially when things feel chaotic. Obama did this seamlessly, right? He was something like, "My story is part of the larger American story," and then immediately pivoted to the values and choices of the founders, citing the Declaration of Independence. He connected his self to the U.S.
Okay, so story of self connects the leader, story of us connects the community, which leads to the story of now. The call to action.
Exactly. The story of now frames the present moment. It highlights the urgent challenge we face right now, a challenge that threatens the shared values we just established in the story of us. It lays out the specific choices we, the community, must make in this moment and what the stakes are. We become the protagonists.
And crucially, that hope we talked about needs to be concrete here.
Yes. It can't just be a vague wish. The story of now must include a credible strategy, a clear vision of how we can get from this urgent problem to a better future. It links the why, our values, to a plausible how, our plan. Think about Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. The powerful dream part came after he vividly painted the nightmare of current injustice America defaulting on its promissory note of equality. He demanded the fierce urgency of now.
And the strategy was clear: nonviolent action, boycotts, marches.
Right. He connected the deep emotional resonance of the dream, story of us values, to specific actionable choices, story of now strategy, that people could make together. That's the power of the full narrative cycle.
It's really compelling. Let's zoom in just for a second on what makes any single story work, whether it's self, us, or now. The source breaks down story elements too, right? Plot, character, moral.
Yeah, the basic building blocks. The plot gets interesting when something unexpected happens. An actor is moving toward a goal, then bam, a challenge arises. They're forced to make a choice, and that choice leads to an outcome. It's the disruption of routine, the unexpected obstacle that grabs our attention. Dealing with that complexity is how we learn.
And we only care about the plot if we identify with the character.
Absolutely. Empathy is the engine of story. We have to be able to step into the character's shoes, feel what they feel. That's how the story persuades us, not through logical argument, but through empathetic identification. We experience the emotional journey, and that's how we internalize the lesson.
Which is the moral.
Yeah.
And it's not like a neat summary at the end.
No, a good moral is a felt understanding. It's wisdom gained through experience, even if it's vicarious experience through the story. The story of David and Goliath isn't really teaching us slingshot techniques. It's teaching us how to feel, how to manage our fear and find courage when we face seemingly overwhelming odds. Stories are fundamentally about sharing emotional wisdom, offering counsel, comfort, inspiration. They're deeply relational.
So bringing this all together, this deep dive really shows that public narrative isn't just like a fancy way of giving speeches. It's a core leadership skill.
It really is. It's the art of strategically telling these interconnected stories of self, us, and now to tap into those deep emotional wells of motivation, the urgency, the righteous anger, the hope, the solidarity. That's what gives people the courage to act together when just knowing the facts isn't enough.
And that storytelling continues even after the main action, with things like celebrations.
Yes, that's a crucial point Ganz makes. Celebrations think of religious services, graduations, rallies, award ceremonies. They aren't just parties. They are rituals where the community comes together to enact its story, to perform its shared identity and values.
So they reinforce the U.S.
They reinforce the U.S., they institutionalize the founding story or the lessons learned from struggle. They help transform moments of crisis or victory into enduring narratives of resilience and new beginnings. It keeps the story alive and the values potent for the next challenge.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. Since values are felt emotionally, and stories are how we share those feelings and values, what parts of your own story of self, those moments of challenge, choice, and learning, might you be underusing right now? What could be a source of courage or motivation for yourself or others?
And maybe even more pressing, what's the real story of now for your team, your organization, or your community? What's the urgent challenge, framed in a way that counters that inertia and actually calls people to action, worth thinking about?